Have you ever just sat down and played Dig Dug? Like, actually. Not to say games from this era are too antiquated to get any enjoyment out of in the context of the present day, one that's separated by multiple decades worth of advancements in the medium. Personally speaking, when I play a game like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, I don't find it particularly difficult to mentally place myself in 1998. Not just adjusting to the isms of a Nintendo 64 game, but to see the low-fidelity presentation within as genuinely impressive, albeit in more of a roundabout way. On the other hand, there's Dig Dug. I played it for a bit. It's alright. It's very much a quaint early 80s arcade game, and no matter how many times it gets re-released, it's always gonna be that way. Definitely not on the level of Pac-Man, but it has its own charm to it. Wait a minute. Oh. Hello. Klonoa's always been one of those series I've been meaning to get to for a long time, but to be more specific, I mean the first game, Door to Phantomile. I think it was more than half a decade ago that I tried playing the original PS1 version on an emulator, but I never ended up getting that far into it. I'm just not the type of person to commit to full playthroughs of series I'm not already familiar with. But a couple years later, something really interesting would happen with the Klonoa series. They released a compilation game. Dubbed the Fantasy Reverie series, it contained new remasters of the first two numbered entries, made available on all major platforms in the year of our Lord, 2022. Incidentally, it also contains the last Klonoa game released beforehand. It's what they based the new version of 1 off of, I think. So, was this the big push that finally got me to play the game? No. But since it seemed interesting enough, I figured I'd probably get around to it at some point. Eventually. Oh damn, it's only $10? I got $10. As I said, this is technically a collection of 2 games, but I'd rather keep this within the scope of just the first game, because I haven't really sunken my teeth into the second one. Also, this isn't going to be a comprehensive analysis of every single little moment in the game. I'll just be highlighting stuff throughout that I think is interesting and whatnot. I'm not ready to do an hour-long analysis. Not yet, anyways. Maybe someday you'll hear me yap more about this collection in a different video. But until then... Can I say how much I really like this title screen? I love the leaves and the other flora blowing in the wind, set against the rural backdrop of some windmill blowing against a bridge, with similar looking buildings teetering off into the distance. It sets the tone really well, I think. Oh, and I'd be remiss not to mention how insanely Dreamcast-like the art style is, especially the color choices, being so bright and saturated that it borders on being legitimately kind of eye-searing. On the Switch OLED's vivid color mode, anyway, it looks more normal on most other displays. Okay, fine, I'll actually get into the game now. The opening moments are very strange. Quite the departure from the cheery title screen. It's like a strange dream. Someone is talking about dreams. A specific dream they remember. What is this dream? Hi, Klonoa. He notices the newly ground-lodged ring and tries pulling it out. It's hard to tell what kind of animal Klonoa is meant to be, if any single animal at all, but I don't think any of them would make his sharp teeth expression not look mildly odd. His creature arms were not built for this. I love how this game sets up Klonoa as such a whimsical guy right off the bat. Like, yeah, of course I want to be his friend and frolic around in the fields of this world. But suddenly, a bell atop the big hill is disturbed by something falling from above, like how the ring fell out of the sky. The bell starts to toll as the sky turns dark. Strange dream, huh? At least his orb fellow friend is there for him. Shortly thereafter, something crashes next to that very same bell like the dream, which Klonoa and Hupo, the orb fellow, notice, making their way out of the house to see what's going on. And that's where the game begins. Real quick, I should probably mention that while this game targets 60 FPS on the Switch, it's very juddery most of the time, as you may have already noticed in the prior cutscenes, if not outright dipping well below that. So if you're especially sensitive to that kind of stuff, I don't know, just try to stay alive, I guess. But besides that somewhat minor issue and the mildly annoying but toggleable tutorial prompts, I really dig what this game's going for. You can move around and jump like every single 2D platformer ever conceived, but Klonoa can also shoot wind bullets out of his aptly named wind ring, which lets you pick up enemies or otherwise immobilize them. You can toss them around, but you can also jump off them, lending itself well to reaching items or areas that otherwise wouldn't be accessible, or even taking shortcuts, like Dig Dug. You can also flutter jump, but honestly that's more useful for lining up precise jumps than it is for extra height because of how you move at a fixed, slower speed during it. But the one thing I really like about this game is that it isn't a 2D platformer. It's 2.5D, which obviously yeah, but the stages do really cool shit with multiple intersecting paths that go way beyond what would be possible in 2D, like circling around a place and falling down a hole, taking you back where you came, or walking into the background to make level progression. It makes the level design far more interesting and distinct, honestly. I've played other games that did something similar, but I particularly like how it's done here. Later in the first stage, you come across this old guy who's building a tower to reach some place called the Moon Kingdom, because he wants to get with some girl called Lafise that lives there, to the point of carving her head out on a cliffside. Jesus Christ, man, get a grip. I don't think she's gonna want you after that. I actually vividly remember this scene from the original PS1 version however many years back, or at least just the general scenery. I don't think I ever played past the first vision though, or even the first stage for that matter, so most of this is going to be uncharted territory for me. After you get through the cave in the next stage, you finally reach the bell and see a person standing on top of the hill. It's someone named Gaddis, and he kidnaps Lafise, who was knocked unconscious after being shot out of the sky, so that he can destroy the world, because he's a real evil bastard. He leaves his spherical servant Joka to deal with Klonoa in the meantime, whom you end up fighting against. Or I guess his pocket monster. Here's a hot take. I think this little fucker is actually more sinister than Gaddis. No real reason, just a small hunch I have. And so, the real adventure begins. We got an actual goal in mind besides play around and have fun, which admittedly I'd be totally cool with since Klonoa's my friend after all. But whatever, I guess I can play a narrative-driven platformer game instead. Now that I mention it, I did know to some extent that Klonoa Door to Phantomile is heavier on story compared to similar platformers, but I never realized how much story is inherently baked into the stages themselves. Which isn't a problem to be clear, but nevertheless it was kind of surprising. I really like Klonoa's dynamic with the people he ends up meeting along the way, befriending them by helping them out with their troubles, like the Forest Guardian in the wilting town of Forlock, or saving the fish Carol's parents from an evil spell and later even being helped out by them. all the while bringing that carefree and whimsical energy of his wherever he goes, which is pretty fitting for someone hailing from a place literally called Breezegale. He's just about as free as the wind, even wielding a so-called wind ring. Kind of like... never mind. I'm not much of a story analysis guy, as you might have guessed, but I still get a lot out of the way this game presents its narrative, even if the cutscenes through which that narrative is told don't exactly have that high level of quality you'd likely want out of it. But the somewhat stilted character animation and occasionally questionable camera angles kinda add to the charm, to be honest. Once bumping up the visual fidelity, those pre-rendered 2D sprites sliding about from before suddenly become remade higher definition character models sliding about, which is going to be pretty noticeable. And then you completely swap that higher definition model with an even higher definition model that has a more faithful design to the original game, while still retaining the exact same animation from before. The less abstract, the more noticeable something like that is, I think. The point I'm trying to make is that thinking about the etymology of remasters makes me think about drilling right in my finger a little bit. Anyways, the mood here in Vision 3.2 is honestly immaculate. The spotlight's thin warm light cutting through the haze of an otherwise nearly monochromatic space, wooden planks and gear strewn about, whatever the hell you call that aesthetic, IFW with it. And that's one small room out of a game with actually quite a few rooms. Like in the very same stage there's the Crash Bandicoot type skill check. Well, at least it looks nice. There are so many gorgeous areas you pass through in Phantomile that are brimming with life. Even if said life is weird enemy guys bumbling around, it tends to feel thematically appropriate. Yeah, the forest may be dying, but the atmosphere be liminal as hell. Or something like that. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore, to be real. Please keep listening. I promise I have an actual point to make. Forgot to bring it up earlier, but I like the map screen being contextualized as a storybook. Kinda reminiscent of Yoshi's Island with the color scheme. You also get a cute little animation on the map each time after completing a stage. I still don't know what's going on here, but subjectively, I'm all here for it. Though I usually skip it, so take that evaluation with a grain of salt. Alright. Is it finally time to talk about that one stage? The one around the midpoint. What might be the most interesting stage in the game. Vision 4-2. So, just to quickly provide some story context, earlier in Vision 3-2, Klonoa and Hupo met up with Forlock's granny, who told them they need the moon pendant to get to the Temple of the Sun to open the passage to the Moon Kingdom. But right as Klonoa said he left the pendant back at home, a certain creature revealed himself, having listened in on the conversation. So now we're racing back to Breezegale before he gets his hands on the moon pendant. Okay, you got that? Right at the beginning of the stage, there's a set of slopes you slide down while dodging enemies, which admittedly is kind of challenging, even if it's more a result of me trying to outgamer the game or some shit like that. Regardless, you'll actually spend most of your time inside a cave, with fans blowing you up to higher areas and breaking rocks with enemies. And these guys are here, who are simultaneously really useful and really fucking annoying. That's the fun of a mechanic that enables further movement options with creatures who ontologically hate your health bar. I still don't like these guys, though. After trekking through the cave, Klonoa makes it to Grandpa just in time, who has the moon pendant he needs to get to the Moon Kingdom. But right as he's about to get his hands on it, Joka shows up and he... Huh? What is he doing? Oh my god. It's kind of overkill, isn't it? Well, no time to sit on that as Klonoa gives chase after Joka flies away, with Klonoa making his way to a bridge where Joka taunts him one more time. He cuts the ropes connecting it to land as he once again flees the scene, but not before unleashing yet another pocket monster of his. I don't know what the context for these crystal things is. And out of said weird crystal thing emerges a big draconic cobra thing, Leading into this stage's boss fight against Valadium, which is its name by the way. I do really like this fight being framed around a swinging bridge and having to dodge hazards coming in from the background. Just another cool way this game utilizes the Z-axis in its design. You have to toss enemies at certain spots on each corner of Valadium's body in order to damage it, though it's strangely strict on the positioning. That sort of goes for tossing enemies into the background in any situation, but it's especially noticeable here, where it ends up being easy to deal very little damage, assuming it even lands in the first place. It's kinda annoying since you have to wait for the bridge to swing back into position, but it's not that big of a deal. It's still manageable. The bosses in Klonoa aren't super exceptional to begin with, so this is more par for the course than anything. They're all a decently fun utilization of the game mechanics for the most part. After defeating Valadium, Klonoa hurries back over to Grandpa as sunset approaches.
Kuro, Paramiru, Waru, Warumanu. Manu, Wamu.
When I heard Klonoa yell out for Grandpa like that, I was sitting in my bed with the Switch in my hand, and I had to put the game down for a moment. Like I pressed the home button and physically put the system down on the sheets, and just contemplated. Contemplated for a good minute or so. What kind of monster would do that? Who would do such a thing to my dear friend Klonoa? Why? It's kind of weird to think back on now, but this moment genuinely had me shook for a bit. I would continue my playthrough the next day, but still. Damn. Later, we see Klonoa. Man, you're making me sad. Come on. Hupo notices Pamela flying in the sky, and they end up hitching a ride on her to get to the Temple of the Sun, where the next vision takes place. I said earlier that Vision 4-2 was around the halfway point, but really, we're basically at the end game now. There are only 4 more stages left to go before the finale. Once arriving at the Temple of the Sun, you come across 2 guys inside, who are the priests of this place. They want Klonoa to collect 4 orbs in order to open the passage to the altar. So I guess we're doing this now. I kinda get the gist of what we're doing, but at the same time I kinda don't. Anyways, and regardless, after the game's constant flirting with non-linearity, this stage goes all in on that. To obtain the orbs required to open the altar, you need to get through 4 challenges for each one, of which you can do in any order, circling back to the same central room. I think it's pretty cool. Honestly, I've always been fond of this trope in platformers. In this case, it comes with a side of damn, this is tough. For some reason, 5-1 kind of felt like a major step up in difficulty compared to what came before. I think part of it is due to it just being really damn long, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, mind you, but also part of that length came from me dying in the same spot, so it's a bit of an Ouroboros thing. That alongside really tricky platforming and button inputs, so add a line down the middle of that figurative Ouroboros coming from the top. After collecting all the orbs and promptly allowing access to the altar, the priest from earlier say Gaddis is being controlled by a nightmare and some kind of spell or something along those lines. God, I really suck at summarizing. I'm trying my best, I swear. Up ahead is the high priest, Moyer? Moir, who was attacked right before we got here. With the power of the Moon Pendant, Gaddis caused the gateway to the Moon Kingdom to return. Moir says that because the world of Phantomile is shaped by the dream of Cress, Gaddis wants to turn that dream into a nightmare, so we need to hurry the hell up there before he does that. Right before we leave, he briefly mentions how the eclipse yields evil power, and to take advantage of your enemies while there is light. Whatever that means. If you didn't get the hint, Moir was talking about this stage's gimmick. When you're outside after enough time, everything will suddenly become dark, fucked up, and evil, with the enemies turning completely invulnerable, until going back to normal. Rinse and repeat. I think it's interesting how the appearance of these enemies, I think they're called moos, turn into purple, gestury looking creatures with green stripes under the effect of heightened evil. There are obvious actual lore implications to that, but I personally take it to mean that form is derived from the evil incarnate, the highest order of disorder among fantasies. So anyways, I really like how there are platforms that'll only appear in darkness, leading to situations like this where during the light, you'll bounce off this enemy to reach the upper ledge, but in the dark, you can't do that, so you need to use the platforms instead. Because the eclipse occurs on a continuous cycle, you always have to be prepared for a drastic shift in your approach at any moment, which, it's easy for that kind of thing to feel more like you're waiting for the correct phase that allows progression, something that even this isn't entirely free from, but the comparatively laid-back pacing of this game makes those moments less of a problem in context. 5 seconds of waiting in a 15 to 20 minute stage isn't exactly a lot. Getting to the top of the sanctuary, we see Gaddis monologuing about egg. Yeah. The egg from which a nightmare is born, to be specific. Joka is also here, and honestly, I think he just wants to kill us at this point. To simply defeat one another in a battle isn't enough if you've reached absolute lunacy like he has. Okay, I'm gonna skip over this. Finally, once and for all, Joka is defeated, which results in his immediate death. Good. He did say something about Klonoa being trapped in a world of nothingness, but that doesn't matter since this is not gonna happen. Not under my watch. Just like the dream, the sky turns dark as Crest comes back into being. We've got one more job to do. This obviously isn't going to come across as well on most other displays, but the Starry Night visible in the outdoor segments of the stage looks so damn nice in the Switch OLED's display, especially if you're playing in the dark like I was, making the colors pop out even more against what's essentially pitch black darkness in real life. Also, I know this is present in a couple other places throughout the game, but getting to see another section of the stage in the background will never not be the sickest thing ever in a side-scroller, or even other genres where that type of thing would be applicable. One last thing I'd like to mention before the end game is the music, in this area specifically. It's been pretty good throughout, but I particularly like the version of this stage's track when you're outdoors, with the piano and stuff. It's a bit chill, it's a bit melancholic, it's really fitting. After going up the lift, a guard calls out for Prince Hupo? And then the Moon Queen shows up, whom Hupo calls Mother. So, as it turns out, Hupo is actually an ugly-ass baby. I'm sorry, did I say something? Well, that's kind of a bombshell to simply drop on your friend, that he literally came from the very place that we've been trying to get to this whole game, but he says he'll explain the rest later. Honestly, I think I might die for these two characters at this point. It's the only way I can reprimand my sin of being. More so Klonoa, but Hupo's definitely not far behind in that regard. I fucking hate Crash Bandicoot. Hyperbole aside, this is a reoccurring set piece throughout this stage, and it is so much more challenging than it looks. I came over it at this part at least once, maybe twice, as a frame of reference. But at the same time, I can occasionally get through totally fine. So maybe the real challenge is purely psychological and the section layout is actually easy. The rest of the stage is mostly fine really, it's just those few moments, those platforming moments, as I'll choose to subjectively classify them. Reaching the very top of Crust and flying to what might be the highest point of all of Phantomile, Klonoa barges in on Gaddis rambling about dreams. We learn Nahatom is the name of the creature that will hatch from the egg, and that it won't simply bring about a nightmare to this dream world, but the complete annihilation of Phantomile. We finally come face to face with him, no more distractions getting in the way. Let's end this once and for all, so we can keep dreaming of Klonoa once more. This fight is interesting. You're put into a continuously rotating wheel as Gaddis summons hazards to fall from the top of the screen, with a few of them being enemies you can toss back at him for damage. There are also 3 green orbs on the floor that'll teleport you to the top of the wheel, effectively wasting your time, so you gotta avoid those. It's a lot to deal with, but it's still manageable. Though, if you're low on lives like I was after the stage, then this will probably give you a brain hemorrhage from the pressure or something. Maybe I should have just picked easy mode without the live system. But since you can't change that without starting a whole new save, and on top of it affecting other things, I'd prefer to stick with normal regardless. There's also 2 more phases. The second where enemy trails bounce around the arena, and the final with an electric barrier you need to break to release the enemies contained inside. That final phase in particular was a real pain in the ass with how the little guys jump all around after they're free, and the electric barrier getting slammed in all sorts of directions, making it pretty hard to even reach it to begin with, especially with the rotation of the ground. But again, it's manageable with good enough positioning. It's not stupidly difficult or anything like that. Hell, you can get through this fight pretty fast if you're able to act on every opportunity the game gives to damage Gaddis, which there's plenty of. I think he's dead. Right after we defeat Gaddis, all the friends we made along the way show up to celebrate our victory. We finally save Phantomile from literally getting destroyed. Yippee! Shit. Yeah, I saw this coming. So now we have to deal with Nahatom, who is notable for having the capability to destroy worlds. I don't think this is looking good for my dear friend Klonoa. But luckily, the Moon Queen says there's one last resort for stopping Nahatom, and that's combining the forces of all the tribes. If it means Klonoa gets to keep existing... sure, why not? So they head off on Palmilla, and as Klonoa is about to follow suit...
What did you... Manyahu? Super.
Strange dream. Huh? Earlier, I said there were only 4 more stages left before the end, and that technically wasn't wrong, because this is the final vision, and not a full-blown stage. Let's get this over with. For real this time. So, what does the combined power of the tribes entail? I suppose they could be cannons, but they're guns. They're going to gun Nahatom down. They need enemies to use as ammunition, so we gotta run around and toss guys into each cannon when Nahatom shoots them into the arena. It's not too bad, but Christ, that tongue attack can be deceptively hard to dodge. Maybe I really am bad at video games, but I've only ever managed to avoid it like once. In every other instance, I go for that long-ass animation, progressively chipping away at my health until I get to a point where I probably end up dying anyways. After loading up all the cannons, we can finally destroy Nahato. Nevermind. Ah, the classic "there's obviously another phase to this boss" trick. With everyone else blasted away and Klonoa getting sucked inside Nahato, we're completely on our own now. But that doesn't mean this fight is unwinnable. There's 4 crystals strewn about that'll damage Nahato if you can manage to toss an enemy at them with enough precision, dealing with the seesawing platform and the lasers coming from Nahato's essence or whatever. Spooky facial features floating around and stuff. After shattering all 4 crystals, 1 more will appear, drifting around the arena. All it takes to shatter it is a couple more hits and... we escape from its innards, the outer appearance of whom has drastically changed after our little excursion. Meanwhile, our friends have returned for one more attempt. No more Nahato backshots. Now it's firing rainbow shockwaves and straight up destroying the very platforms you and the enemies stand on. With each cannon loaded, its attacks grow ever more dangerous, alongside the risk of accidentally falling down. There are even meteors that shower down at this point. But with enough skill, enough strength, enough willpower, maybe dreams can be made into reality. Even with the hardships that may come along the way, there'll always be a light at the end of the tunnel. A light manifested by the sheer bond you have with others. Or, in other words, the power of teamwork.
Hypo, Mani Raffi. Hypo. Yuppie. Yuppie. Wahoo. Paramour. Mani Paramour.
I think I'll stop pretending now. This ending hurt my soul. Phantomile isn't a world. Phantomiles are many worlds. Klonoa isn't from this world, but another. He is the strange dream who was brought into this Phantomile for the purpose of restoring the balance of dreams. He never lived in that quaint house by the windmill. Grandpa was never his grandfather, and Hypo. The time they spent together playing in the wilderness never happened. Those memories were entirely fabricated by Hypo. Once Diva Lafitte sings the Song of Rebirth, Klonoa won't be able to stay in this world any longer, not even getting the chance to say goodbye. Before being able to process any of what Hypo just told him, a familiar song begins to echo throughout the skies. Klonoa suddenly starts to be pulled back by the wind, back to where he came. Hupo hurries over to tug on the wind ring in his hand, paralleling the opening moments of the game. He doesn't want him to leave either. Eventually, however, that light breeze swells into a vicious gale, becoming far too strong for either of them to hold on. And then... man, it was hard to even record the footage of the scene for this video, let alone experiencing it firsthand in my playthrough. Klonoa doesn't deserve that. No one does. Then, life returns to the flora which had shriveled. Hupo wipes the tears out of his eyes when he notices the flower next to him came back to life, and just stares off into the distance. And then, the credits roll. Where did Klonoa really go? What does his homeworld look like? What Phantomile may he find himself in next? There's almost certainly an answer to one of those questions, as Klonoa is a series of multiple games in the present day, including the direct sequel that's quite literally the latter half of this 2022 collection, the former of which you've heard me talk about for nearly 30 minutes. Or over 30 minutes by this point. But what Klonoa is now is not what it was, and neither is this excerpt of Door to Phantomile I've experienced via Fantasy Reverie series. It's a remaster of the 2008 remake for the Wii of the 1997 original on the PS1, of course. So there's bound to be just a smidge of influence from the other games seeping into this version in one way or another. I've said many times that Klonoa is my friend, but honestly, I don't really know him like that. Sure, our short time hanging out was pretty cool, but I wouldn't say we're friends or anything. I'm only mildly parasocial about him. On one hand, I really appreciate there are more journeys with Klonoa out there to be experienced. But on the other hand, I think the things and ideas the story leaves behind after its ending are fascinating enough for it to stand on its own, not necessarily needing a continuation which would provide further context and ideas that build off the original game. And again, that's kind of ironic for me to say, since I played the Door to Phantomile's Fantasy Reverie series version over the PS1 original, which would not exist if Klonoa wasn't a series of games, at least far from its current state, I'd imagine. If I had played the original version of Klonoa Door to Phantomile, would I have liked it as much? Would it have been too dated for me to get into in the first place? Given my own track record for these types of games, probably not, but I can't help but think about the differences that would have totally reshaped my experiences. Not in a negative way, but just different. I fully played through The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the first time earlier this year, but the footage I used when talking about immersing myself in its world despite the game's age was an unofficial PC port called Ship of Harkinian, because that was the version I played. And with that comes enhancements like running at any resolution combination imaginable, mapping items to the D-pad, a frame rate that can be interpolated to be much higher than it ever could have been on original hardware, and other new optional features. At the end of the day, it's still Ocarina of Time 1998 Nintendo 64 video game, but it's different. I really love the Klonoa Door to Phantomile I played. It's genuinely such a wonderful game, even on the basis of the story alone, but it also comes with really fun gameplay. At some point, I'll probably look deeper into the Klonoa series than whatever I end up needing footage of for this very video, and possibly finally learn what Nahatome smoking is all about. But I think I'm content for now with this aforementioned excerpt of Klonoa. It's satisfying enough. See you some other time, Klonoa. Dude, what the fuck? That's my full name and address. Why is it there? How does it know? that